This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. All right, everybody, it's episode 36. This is the second episode after we've kind of done a little bit of a redux of the Plagmanrules Podcast, and today we're just going to really talk about some box office stuff. We're going to take a look at what did well this weekend, which was actually a lot of stuff. We'll be talking about what expectations are left for the rest of the releases coming out in April, and I did want to comment quickly on the Molly Ringwald New Yorker article and kind of how there's a little bit of a deception happening with this article, actually. Okay, so let's get started here with the box office. We're going to start with what did very well this weekend, and there's actually a lot to talk about at the box office this weekend. Of course, we had 4 new films entering wide release: A Quiet Place, Blockers, Chappaquiddick, and The Miracle Season. A Quiet Place, obviously, as you have probably learned by now, won the weekend box office, $50.2 million for its opening weekend. The per theater average is up to $14,000 plus. That's quite a start for the movie. And then you also have to consider in the fact that it only costs $17 million to make. So after the marketing costs and everything, they've pretty much broken even already with this thing opening weekend. And what's really great about this is that it's a Paramount release, and Paramount has been having a really hard time lately. They just had Annihilation come out a few weeks ago, and that one, to my knowledge, has not made its money back. It's really just been kind of a downer for them. Mother was a big bath that they had to take last fall, and they also, were potentially looking at some Oscar prospects from that film too, and that did not even come close to panning out. And then also when you look at it, their Transformers films have been decreasing at the box office lately. The Mission Impossible franchise has been kind of hit and miss. The Star Trek franchise is now starting to tail off too, so Paramount needed a hit, and I think they have one with A Quiet Place. Now, the word of mouth is pretty strong. I haven't seen the film yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing it, and it looks like this film is going to continue to do very well until Avengers Infinity War hits at the end of the month. Now, we do have Rampage coming out next week. I think that will probably win the box office, but I'm not going to be actually shocked at all if A Quiet Place does manage to hold on to that number 1 spot. But it's going to have to take like a 30% or less drop, I think, to retain that number 1 spot. In third place, Blockers was the new film as well, $20.5 million opening weekend. Now, this one, I really don't know what to think about it. The critics so far have really liked it, and the audience so far looks like it's receiving it pretty well, but the ads for this film make it look really, really bad. I'm not planning on seeing it, but I'm kind of curious about how this one kind of took off. It only has a budget of $21 million, so it hasn't, again, we've kind of talked about this before, but remember that not every dollar made at the box office goes directly back to that budget. You have to remember that there are marketing costs, there are deals that are made where every dollar earned goes back to this, goes back to that. Part of it gets divvied up here and there amongst the producers, the actors, writers, directors, etc. So you have to remember that not every dollar earned goes right back to making up for that budget cost. So this one, as long as it doesn't take like a 60% drop or something in the next week, and it continues to do okay, then it should make its money back, no problem. But this one, I think for the for where they were aiming at it for the weekend for its expected opening, I think they said anywhere between 15 and 20. So this one landed at the higher end of expectations. Next up, we should talk about Ready Player One as well. It only dropped down 41% for $24.6 million its second weekend. I did see this one, Ready Player One. For my money, this is the best film I've seen all year, but I've only seen 2 so far this year, so that doesn't count for much. Black Panther being the other one. And Black Panther, I really enjoyed it, but not as much as Ready Player One. And that one, the reported costs of that one have been anywhere between $175 and $225 million. I've even heard as low as $150. So nobody really knows what the exact budget on that one is. But so far in the States here, it's just short of $100 million. Worldwide, it's closer to $400 million. So this one, while it's relying on that offshore money to get its budget back, it still, I think, is kind of a higher point for Spielberg here, at least domestically, in his last few films. Lincoln did pretty well at the box office back in 2012, but then since then, none of them have really been outstanding. I mean, Bridge of Spies did good for what it was. The Post did okay. The BFG was a big money loser for Disney. Otherwise, War Horse did okay, and a few of the other ones there. Tintin did all right, at least here in the States. Worldwide, it did much better. But this is definitely one of the higher points for Spielberg here. Probably going back to his days on, say, War of the Worlds and kind of some of those more blockbuster fare that he's been doing here, and that's over 10 years ago now. So good on him to finally getting one that looks like it's going to be 150 million plus probably here at the domestic box office when all is said and done. Okay, and then let's get to the other two new releases. Chappaquiddick opened to 5.7 million. That was only in 1,500 theaters, a little over that. And I think I've seen tracking was putting that one at about 3 or 4 million. So that one did exceed expectations pretty well. Actually, that's one of the bigger winners of the weekend as far as comparisons go. A Quiet Place, I heard projections for that all over the place. I'd heard 40 million, I had heard 20 million, I'd heard 25. So that one, I mean, if you do take the 20 million, or some people even estimated 18 million opening there, yes, it did shatter the roof off of those expectations. But otherwise, Chappaquiddick, I was thinking if it doesn't hit 3 million, it's barely going to hit 1. I thought it would really struggle there, but nope, so far it looks like there's an audience for it. And then lastly, we had the Miracle season open. This one opened with 3.9 million in 1,700 theaters. So this one, I think, was projecting at about 4 million, so it was at or just slightly below expectations, but yeah, not much to comment on that. I haven't seen any marketing or anything for that one. However, when we look at the per theater average, the big winner this weekend was You Were Never Really Here. This is a new film. Joaquin Phoenix stars, and he actually won the Best Actor award at Cannes last year for the film, and now it's finally hitting domestic theaters close to a year later. And it only played in three theaters, but earned over $130,000 for a per theater average of $44,276. Now, with an opening like that, we're definitely going to see it pick up and say it's going to move from 3 theaters this weekend to probably 15 or 20, and then from there we'll see where it goes. But that's a fantastic start, and it's only playing right now in New York and LA, but and it's from I believe it's from Amazon. They're the ones distributing it. They're looking at an expansion here in the next couple of weeks, so that maybe by April 20th they'll be in 500 or 600 theaters. That's at least what I'm seeing here, and just based off this initial weekend in only 3 theaters, looks like it's going to hit that. Okay, now with that all being said, now I wanted to quickly look down the list of what else is coming out here in April. Now obviously we've got the big juggernaut of Avengers Infinity War coming out the last weekend of April. Until then, next week we have Rampage opening up. This will be the big Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson entry. Well, for what, a couple of months until the Skyscraper movie comes out. We'll see about that one. But Rampage, I think, has been really bumping up its marketing campaign here in the past few weeks. They've been releasing like 3 trailers a week, it feels like. And this one, I'm not really a huge fan of the source material here, the old video games and stuff. Now, I did play back when I was a kid an updated version of it from like the mid 2000s and stuff. I don't know. I had fun playing it then, but it was just as a kind of throwaway, kind of mindless gaming experience. I wouldn't call it one of my absolute favorites, but that was the only thing I'd ever heard about it until then. And then with this new movie came out, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, yeah. So that kind of ticked my memory in that way, but otherwise there wasn't really too much else to talk about there. And for me, again, it's with these big monster films, I'm just kind of done with them. Like the last Godzilla really didn't work for me. Kong Skull Island was okay. I personally have not seen it. I only saw it once in the theater, and that was enough for me. So I'm kind of done with these big monsters. And plus, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Now, I'm not his biggest fan. I think as an action star, of course, it's kind of undeniable. He's pretty hip to that, and he definitely brings in the audiences, and he does fine with what he's given in those films, like the Fast and the Furious franchise, and even something like Baywatch. I thought he was actually not the worst part of it, but that all being said, I'm kind of done with him right now. I mean, sure, it's good that he gets out all these movies and that he's working as hard as he is, but it's it gets to a certain point where you're like, okay, you feel a little oversaturated with him. That's where I'm at right now, and that's without having seen all his films either, by the way. Then we've got Truth or Dare. This is the newest Blumhouse release, also opening this weekend because it's Friday the 13th. And this one, I'll tell you what, it looks pretty freaking stupid. I mean, the ads for it literally make me laugh every time because it just looks so fakey. Now, I've had similar reactions to films like this, at least with the ad campaigns, like Don't Breathe. I had the same reaction to those trailers and TV spots, but then I actually sat down and watched the movie, and it was pretty damn good. I don't want to say the same thing about Get Out, but I was kind of a little left lost at sea by the ad campaign for Get Out. I wasn't sure what it was going for, but I mean that turned out to be one of the best films of last year. So you kind of have to give Blumhouse the benefit of the doubt in these situations, but this one, I don't know. The ad campaign for it just makes it look very silly, very predictable. I haven't seen their last one, Happy Death Day, but I do have a couple people that I've talked to that have seen it, and they thought it was okay. One of them actually really hated it, but everybody else, nobody flat out loved it. And for the ad campaign for that one, I'm like, it looks all right, but I didn't end up shelling out any bucks to go and see it. But I don't plan on doing so for Truth or Dare. Now, as far as how these films are going to open, though, that's really the big question. Rampage right now, I think, is tracking between 35 and 40 million. I would actually not be shocked if this thing didn't hit 20 million. Now, I might be just lowballing it because I'm personally not very interested in it, and it is Dwayne The Rock Johnson. He's one of the few, 5 or 6 stars left nowadays that can actually open a movie, really big, just off of the name alone or just off of the brand of the actor alone. But even that being said, you do have Infinity War coming up. A lot of people that don't really have the means to see every last movie that comes out every weekend, they might be saving their money for that, or the word of mouth being so strong on A Quiet Place, that might be something where they're like, well, I can only see one kind of monster movie here. Do I want to see one that's actually, and so far we don't have any reviews yet for Rampage either, which at this point I think kind of hurts it. But Quiet Place has been very, very well received critically. I think it's in the upper echelons of 95% plus on Rotten Tomatoes right now. So usually that means that the word of mouth is strong and everything. And plus, I think most of the people who went to see it also gave it a positive review on Rotten Tomatoes as well. So I think the word of mouth there is going to hurt Rampage. I think no critic reviews at this point doesn't really give people on the fence much of a positive buzz. And also, to a degree, the PG-13 rating of Truth or Dare for the teenage horror audience, a lot of those teenage horror audiences do cross over into the kind of spectacle action movie like Rampage is. So I think that also hurts it a little bit. Now, do I think Truth or Dare is going to open to like 20, 25 million the way that Happy Death Day did? No, I don't think so. That one is tracking for about 13 or 14 million, which I think will probably be about right. On the high end of expectations, I can see it getting to like 17 or 18 million, but I personally don't see it crushing the 20 million plus. Rampage, like I said, at worst, I think that one cracks 18 or 19. At best, yeah, I can see it going up to 40 or 45 million, but I'm probably going to stick with around 30 million for its opening weekend. For Truth or Dare, I'll stick with that 14 million. We've also got Isle of Dogs opening up into wide release next weekend as it hits 1,750 theaters. Now, this one, I'm dying to see this one. I really am looking forward to this one. The critical reviews have been really strong. Word of mouth's been really strong. So I think this one, and it's doing all right so far at the box office and its release. It's been in just limited release until next weekend here, but I'm thinking we're probably going to see it as it expands further hit 6 or 7 million its next weekend. And that I think is pretty good, especially when you consider it's stop motion animation, which doesn't always sell out all the crowds, and the fact that it is Wes Anderson, I think, does open it up so that some people who don't normally go to see these kind of movies, they'll see this, they'll see Fantastic Mr. Fox, and so on and so forth because of the Wes Anderson factor. So that one I can see making about 7 or 8 million as it enters wide release. Okay, now coming up on 420, which I'm sure is a more significant date to some than others, we've got 3 films actually entering wide release. We've got I Feel Pretty, which is probably looking at one of the bigger debuts of the weekend here, the new Amy Schumer movie. Tracking on this one has been somewhere around $17 million, which we'll see. I mean, personally for me, I think Amy Schumer really hit a low note with that Blended movie last year, at least at the box office. It didn't do very well at all. Trainwreck was a big hit for her, but then after that, to follow it up with something like Blended, which didn't really sell very well at all, kind of leaves a mixed reception there. Plus the film itself, the ad campaign, personally, I think it looks a little better than Blended, but not by much. So I'm not on the fence to see this one either. I think I'll skip this one. That, when you factor in also that it's got kind of a limited market here, at the same time, that limited market kind of aiming toward the more female-oriented crowds, I don't see a ton of them going out to Avengers Infinity War the next weekend, so I think that that doesn't really hurt it too much. So I think, 17 million is, again, the tracking number here. I think it's possible, but I'm probably leaning more toward 15, or the 12 to 15 million range is my expectations there. Then we have the long-awaited, long-delayed Super Troopers 2 opening up. This one is only tracking for about 5 million, I think, because it is Fox Searchlight. They're probably going to put it in just barely wide release, like 1,000 or 11 or 1,200 theaters. So that doesn't always mean it's going to be a gigantic opening weekend. For me personally, though, I do think that there is a sentiment toward the first movie. It's been airing on cable a lot lately. So I'm thinking 8 or even 9 or $10 million could be a possibility for its opening weekend. That's probably the high end of expectations is 10 million, but I'm going to stick closer to that 5 million and say between 6 and 7 million is probably where it's going to land. Then we've got Traffic opening up as well on the 20th. I don't know much about this one, and I've not seen any ad campaign or anything for it. Tracking only has it at 3.5 million opening weekend. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know much about that one. Now, here comes the behemoth of them all, Avengers Infinity War, opening on Friday, April 27th. Now, I kind of discussed it last time, but I think the reason they're opening this early is twofold. I think, number one, it gives Disney a better chance of retaining its box office standards with a better opening for Solo, a Star Wars movie, which also just had a new trailer come out, and that new trailer, by the way, does look really damn good. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. And then also when you look at it too, we've seen with a lot of the previous Marvel movies, you can even go back to the first Avengers movie, I think, what Marvel likes to do, and Disney, they like to open up their movies about a week or 2 weeks sometimes early in some of the European markets. Sometimes that's also true for the South American and the African markets, what they have there at least. And then also for a couple Asian audiences, I believe, as well. So I think part of the reason why they're doing that, for whatever reason, they're not willing to delay the foreign release for a week and push everything to May 4th. Instead, they're just doing one release, Friday the 27th. Screw the whole fact that, for the most part, Marvel has done this to where they're going to open every one of their movies in the beginning of May, the first weekend in May. For the most part, they've been doing that the last 5 to 10 years now. Except for, like, X-Men Origins Wolverine, or, what was the other one? Oh, yeah, Amazing Spider-Man 2 also got a release date before them. For 2014. Otherwise, I think every year that they've had a film, whether that's Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Thor, Avengers, Iron Man 3, Guardians of the Galaxy most recently, the second Avengers film, Cap Civil War, they've all opened the first weekend of May. So that was the plan for Infinity War, but I think because, for whatever reason, again, they're not willing to delay that foreign release a week, and instead they're just going to push it all to the 27th, that means they're going to crush all of the April records, though. It cuts out the chance that any of those foreign audiences can spoil the film, because we've seen that before, where you can actually go online, say, the day of foreign release, and there's a pirated copy already for you there. It's always like theater quality, and it's all shaky, and you can't really see more than half the movie because somebody's always standing up in front of the screen, or the camera guy has to, tuck his camera away because somebody's walking by and they don't want to be spotted or anything like that. So that's of course no way to see a movie. But if somebody catches just the right moment, it could spoil the whole movie for for a few people that are wanting to spread spoilers or are just too curious and can't wait. So yeah, and they're still gonna open the movie, I think, 3 or 4 days early for a few markets here and there. So yeah, there is the chance that a couple spoilers will get out before even the 27th, or actually the 26th when it enters its major release here in the US with like the 7 o'clock shows and stuff. So yeah, there is that chance, but I still think though that this gives them a chance to crush all the April records the way they just crushed all the February records with Black Panther. So now, as far as this goes, tracking, they had a big report come out that 200 million was what they were seeing right now. I think it could do 200 million in its sleep. really, and then we've seen an updated tracking actually from Pro Box Office, and they are putting it at 225, and I think that's way closer. Now, for me personally, I think that this one, it's got 200 million almost for sure, unless we get like a downpour of bad reviews the day before or 2 days before the movie comes out, whenever that embargo's up, which I think is actually the 23rd. So it's 3 days before those 7 and 8 o'clock shows start on the 26th. Unless every review is negative and there's a big backlash against it, something happens, then 200 million is going to happen no matter what. Now, if it comes out and we see a reaction like The Last Jedi, where the studio was not anticipating any negative reception, they were thinking everybody was going to love it, and it turns out there's a couple things in there, or even one thing, that every big Marvel fan hates, and all of a sudden they're looking at, a huge divide among the audience. If that happens, they've definitely still got 200 million. They'll probably go more than 200 million opening weekend, but it's going to affect it in the long run for sure. Now, if this is like The Force Awakens, where mostly everybody comes out of it positive, there's nothing to piss off the core fans and the big core audiences of the film who go back multiple times, then I think that's when we start to see the 225, or my estimates, I'm putting it at 230 or 235. I think it's going to beat The Last Jedi, which I think is the second biggest opening of all time here in the States. It's going to beat Black Panther. It's going to beat the first Avengers at the box office for those other Marvel records. I think they're the only ones otherwise that have opened to 200 million plus. Like I said, I'm putting it between 230 and 240, I think, right now. Now, once the reviews come out, if the reviews are really great and, there's no reason at all to believe that the fan response is going to be mixed or negative, then I think, we could go even higher from there. We could even see a 250 million opening happen. Am I betting on it? No, not quite. Because another thing, too, we have to remember is with The Force Awakens, there were many factors that helped that movie get to 247 million. Part of it was it's the Christmas holiday season, so mostly everybody has work off. All of the college kids and all the school kids, elementary school kids, and high school kids, all them that go to the movies and love Star Wars, they've got multiple days off. They can go back multiple times. Plus it was the first time we'd seen characters like Han Solo and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker on screen in 30 plus years. Whereas in the Avengers, we've seen most of these characters in the past couple of years, so it's not quite that big of a big return. Plus, we have to think about it, this is in it's the last weekend of April. It's right before some of the colleges start to get out. It's right before some of the schools start to get out. So a lot of the kids and a lot of the college audiences, and not a whole lot of people take vacations this part of the year. So a lot of those people who can go back multiple times right away opening weekend is going to be diminished compared to what Force Awakens had, and so on and so forth. So for those reasons, I'm going to put it lower than Force Awakens at the moment, but I think not by much, because this is, and another thing too, Force Awakens was 2 hours and 15 minutes. This one reportedly has been 2 hours 36 minutes, or close to that. But 156 was what my 7 o'clock show on the 26th said when I bought it with Fandango, so I'll go with that for now. So the long running time definitely affects it. I think that also affected for part of the numbers for The Last Jedi, and it could also affect some of the numbers for like the first two Avengers movies, which were 220 plus, I believe, in runtime. So I think that factors into it too, and that's it's still going to do extremely well. So don't take this the wrong way. Don't say if it doesn't hit 240 or 250 or 225, that means it's a failure. No. We can't start saying that. If it opens to say anything under 150, I think would be a huge disastrous opening. Below 150 would be bad. If it hits right at 200, that's okay. If it hits between 150 and 200, that's all right. It could have done better, but like I said, I think we'd have to see some pretty extreme circumstances for that to be the case. And really, I think that's that's the end of the April month there. So I think we're looking at a pretty strong, definitely I think going to be a record-breaking month here at the domestic box office. Okay, so that's really going to do it for the box office part. Now I wanted to quickly mention here, I don't know how long I'm going to go on about this. I could go on for, sometimes forever on a topic I think I'll just take 5 minutes on, but I don't know about this one. I was going to bring it up here. I was going to do actually a show on over the weekend here because I think this came out on Friday or Saturday, but there was a piece in the New Yorker that was actually written by Molly Ringwald, where she kind of looked back and rewatched some of her films from the 80s. Now, of course, we're talking about The Breakfast Club. We're talking about Pretty in Pink. We're talking about 16 Candles, of course. And, for me personally, let me just introduce it in this way. Breakfast Club, I think, of those three movies is the best. I'm not as big a fan as everybody else is of 16 Candles. I think it's definitely a good movie, and it's got really funny moments. It's got some really charming moments and so on and so forth, and I think a lot of the cast does a great job. And Pretty in Pink, I'm kind of on that side where I'm like, it's good, but it's not that good. That's probably my least favorite of the three. But Breakfast Club is easily my favorite of those three. But the New Yorker piece here, I read some headlines initially on this and people reacting to it and so on that really are deceptive. And this is the reason why I wanted to bring it up. Normally when an actor looks back on their career, it's nothing special. It's kind of interesting if you're a really big fan of the actor or if you've really followed the actor's career for a long, long time. I can't personally say that about Molly Ringwald, but initially I didn't think much of it. But then the headlines came out, and these headlines again are deceptive, and they're saying and I'm not going to name any particular sites because I don't really remember, to be honest. And I don't usually pay much attention to these other sites anyways, but they were saying how Molly Ringwald really was criticizing the films and not criticizing them like, they're okay, they're still good movies, but it's not one of those. No, the headlines made it out where she was skewering these films, like absolutely taking these films behind the woodshed and claiming them as homophobic, misogynistic, racist, and all the other, taking advantage of stereotypes and enhancing stereotypes and so on. And when you actually read the piece, I've read most of the New Yorker piece here. I haven't read every last part of it, but I've got it up in front of me here, and that is not the case. No, in fact, when you look up, how many times does she mention how racist the films are? If you do a search, you'll only find the word racist once. If you look for, how many times do they mention misogynistic? Once. How many times do they mention homophobic? Once. So, I mean, when that to me, I think is absolutely ludicrous for these other sites to go out here, take one look at this article, kind of breeze through it, see, she mentions this once. Therefore, the whole article is about this. If it's only mentioned once. Bullshit. Bullshit. Yeah, don't, be careful of this, guys and gals out there. If you're looking around at articles, if you like this site or whatever, because it kind of looks on other articles and looks on other, stories, just be careful. Don't look too far into them without actually reading the original source material. In this case, this came from a New Yorker article. Now, what she's basically saying here, once you've read the article, or at least this section of the article, is she is saying that she noticed that, yes, these films can be considered racist, misogynistic, I should say, and at times homophobic. The words fag and faggot are tossed around with abandon. The character of Long Duck Dong in 16 Candles is a grotesque stereotype, as other writers have detailed far more eloquently than I could. That's a direct quote, by the way, from the article, that last part there. So, and then she goes on to say that, even though people have gone on to say this, she's also met many people, and she says more than I could count, that have said that these films have also saved them because they are, and that's, I think, really what we're looking at here. These films are not meant to put down those stereotypes. They're not meant to put down anybody, like with the Long Duck Dong character, they're not putting down the Asians, or they're not putting down Asian Americans. They're not putting down blacks. They're not putting down African Americans. They're not putting down, anybody in that case. And, sure, there's a couple moments here that, like they mentioned, like I've seen other articles mention this. Yeah, there's a couple scenes in The Breakfast Club where John Bender's character is going around being a total dick, but that's kind of the point of his character. He's kind of like, until you figure out that the principal guy, whose name I'm forgetting right now, sorry, the Paul Gleason character. Until you figure out that he's the real antagonist of the movie, John Bender is a pretty antagonistic character for the first 2/3 of the movie. Until we get to that scene, of course, where he catches Bender and then he, threatens to beat the shit out of him or whatever. That scene. It's like, before that scene, it's like, Bender's kind of the bad guy here. He's getting the gang into trouble, and he's really only causing trouble for himself. And he does toss around words and make fun of everybody. It's like, yeah, he's kind of the bad guy. But then you realize, well, he's only acting this way, to act out against the whole society, because his society and his growing up experience has not been a pleasant one. So yeah, and that's, I think, the thing that that people really today, the whole liberal agenda today, really gets wrong. They look back at older movies, or the argument I always hear, and I could go on about Gone with the Wind for like 20 or 30 minutes here, but I'll just try to get this as brief as I can here. They'll take something like Gone with the Wind and say how, they look at it from a very subjective lens where it can only be viewed in this way, and if you view it in this way, it changes the whole perspective of the film. And when they do it, they're doing it just to say something bad about it. In the same way, again, if you view The Breakfast Club from a certain lens, all you're going to see is misogynism, or at times you're going to see a little stereotyping and stuff. Yeah, but only if you view it from a certain point of view, only if you go in looking for certain specific things. But we have to remember that actually, if you total up, if somebody goes to the movie and writes up every time there's a misogynistic moment, or a misogynistic line, or a line about stereotyping, or a line about how, when they make fun of the nerd character, they make fun of the jock character, and so on. When you total that up, it actually is not going to be a ton of the film. It's not the whole or a majority of the film. No, it's the story of the movie is about how 5, high schoolers come together, form an unlikely friendship, and really talk about growing up, and how, the famous line, when you get old, your heart dies, and so on and so forth. It's really more about that, and the kind of inner looks at teenage life at the time. It's not about misogynism. It's not about celebrating that. It's a ridiculous notion, I think, to go in proclaiming that and studying that and looking for that, because yeah, you'll find it, but it's not what the film is about. And if you've been watching my Oscars videos here, for the past 2 months, I have been harping, or more than that, probably the last 4 months, I have been harping big time on all these people who hated Three Billboards just because of one character who was not the main character. Sure, he gets a lot of screen time, and his character does kind of, revolve the story a little bit, and it changes the story a little bit here and there. But that was not what the film was about. The film was about the mother trying to get revenge on the police department, and trying to avenge her fallen daughter. In the same way, again, that The Breakfast Club is not about misogyny. It's not about stereotyping. It's about exploring who teenagers are, and about how 5 teenagers are just trying to get through life, and just trying to get through high school so they can hopefully move on to better things. That's what it's about. And, again, just to kind of bring this whole thing back in, because I mentioned Gone with the Wind here. Now, I just read the book Gone with the Wind like a month ago. I finished it a few weeks ago here. 1,075-page book, or whatever it is. So it did take me a little while, and I had to read, it was like 40 pages a day to get it done, because I wanted to get it done within a month or so, and I managed to get it done. That's when it was due, by the way. So yeah, I read the whole book, and I can tell you, as a guy who most of the time leans conservatively on a lot of issues politically, I'll tell you, I really had a hard time getting through the book when it got to the black characters' dialogue. Because I don't know if, for those of you who haven't read it, which I'm sure there's a lot of people in today's generation that don't even care about the movie or the story, every time there's an African-American character speaking, a slave character, or just, a character of color speaking, it's written in, I don't know, how do you describe it, but it's like, it's written with the affectation of how, of how the black speech can come out. It's written in that way where the letters are shortened, and it's an affectation of how they sounded. And I every time it came to that, I was like, oh, this is terrible. And it was awful. I'm not celebrating that at all. What I celebrate when I read the book and when I watch the old movie is the story. It's not about, and really, there's a lot of people who really have looked at Gone with the Wind in a certain way where they say all it's about is celebrating the Old South and celebrating the time of slavery. No, if that's all you've seen in the story or in the movie, you've missed the whole point. The whole point of the movie is to really capture a certain moment in history. It's capturing this moment of the Old South and saying how, yes, there were some grandiose ideas. There were a lot of people who profited from slavery and a lot of people who had great lives because of slavery. But you know what? A lot of those people were bad. And as we see, Scarlett O'Hara is our main character, but she's not the hero. No, the hero of the story is really Mammy, the maid character, the African American maid character. She's the real hero of the story. She's the one who gets everybody under control, holds the house together, helps raise the daughters and so on and so forth, raises the kids, as we see in the book. They only had one kid in the movie, but that was just for even the end of the movie. But that's one thing when you just see the movie and then read the book later, it's like, holy cow, she had 2 other kids, and she does in the book. She's the one really taking care of everybody, whereas Scarlett's going around really just, being a very selfish bitch. And that's the character of Scarlett O'Hara. Now, sure, she has some heroic moments where, she'll save Melanie and she'll, take everybody to safety and get the plantation up and running again to at least to the level where it's, they can have money, they can eat, they can have food and everything, sure. And all that, but really the hero of the story is Mammy, and anybody who sees the movie and doesn't see that, you've missed the whole point, and you've really missed what that story is about. It's about how, sure, the South, again, let me try to rephrase this to where it's a little more clear. The South, the Old South, had its low points, slavery and all that stuff. It was bad. And the whole Confederacy movement, yes, it was to hold on to the slaves. That was bad. But at the same time, you have to remember, too, that back in those days, the Southern economy helped run the state, helped run the nation. And so there was that push and pull that, if we were still living that today, that push and pull would still be here. And damn sure if it is. It is. It absolutely is. And no, not necessarily about slavery today, but about the difference between the ethnicities and difference between cultures and difference between skin color and so on. That push and pull is still there. And, again, as I've said before, there's the idea floating around Hollywood that we've gotten rid of that's over with, that's done with. Nope, not by a long shot. But anyways, the whole point, again, of the book, it's not celebrating the Old South. It's saying that's what led our country to the success where it was until we got to, the 20s and 30s, really the 20s, before the Great Depression and everything. But, when big businesses took off, it wasn't until then that we'd really improved as a nation. And even then, we had rough times. It's really hard. I cannot, it's impossible to really sum up the whole book in a big, eloquent way in that way, because it is such a large story and everything. And above all else, it is a love story after all. And the love story, really, the slavery part doesn't factor into the love story hardly at all. Like barely, like maybe 5%. And overall it is just a classical love story in that sense. But and really there is kind of this idea, that could be floated around by the liberal agenda where it's like, well, you know what, I would, maybe the story would work better if we cut slavery out. Well, okay, well, it's set during the Civil War. You can't cut slavery out. I mean, because then you're really harping on getting rid of a whole generation of African Americans and their perspective and their experience. Do you really want to deny them that? I mean, and it's really white liberals who are saying this. I mean, so anyways, but yeah. So I know the whole Gone with the Wind argument can go on, and I'm sure there are people, if you're really affected by this, we can try to have a civilized conversation back and forth, but still. The whole point of the matter is that it's not really cool to look back on an old movie and because one line or one moment here and there, I'm not saying there's just one moment or just one line here and there in either Breakfast Club, Gone with the Wind, or hell, you can go to practically any film, really. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, just one part is all you're looking at. No, there's usually multiple lines or multiple parts, But again, if you're just looking for that, you're missing the whole point of the movie. And to go back and do that, I think you're really shortchanging it. I think you're giving a bad taste in the mouth of kind of younger audiences who are seeking out films that they could really like. And just because, of one thing, you're going to keep them from seeing a great movie. Just because of a couple of lines here and there or a couple of ideals that maybe aren't politically correct right now, but nobody gave a shit back then, they're going to miss a whole great movie. And sometimes that's the way it is. In the same way that we're kind of seeing a small amount of that now with the whole Me Too movement, where we want, where some women really want, like the Harvey Weinstein, every film he ever touched gone, wiped from existence. No, that's no way to do it. Or people who want that with all of Kevin Spacey's films. No way to do it. I just rewatched on Netflix L.A. Confidential, and he's the top billed star, but he's actually kind of more of a supporting character in the film. It's a great film. He gives a decent performance. It's not his best work, but he does a good job. And the whole movie is terrific. Absolutely great. And that probably should have won the Oscar that year. More than Titanic, more than Good Will Hunting, more than whatever else came out that year. I forget the other ones. But yeah, that was the standout film of that year. So do you really want to wipe all this stuff out just because it has an actor in it that you don't really like anymore? Or just because, again, going back to the whole Breakfast Club idea, or in this case, 16 Candles, do you really want to wipe that film off the map because it has one use of the word fag or something? I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous notion. So my whole point, going back to where I was going with this, if you're really curious about this, read the article. It is really cool to see her go back and really relive her experiences and sharing this experience with her 10-year-old daughter, too, who hadn't seen the films yet. I think they said she was 10, but yeah, she was kind of younger. And then also how she talks about the stories of people who come up to her and say, especially if they're from the LGBT community, or if they're somebody from a foreign background of some kind, whether that's Asian American or African American or even Indian American, and where they'll say, your movie was wonderful, even if I wasn't in it, or my, because they were 5 white kids after all back then in the film. Even though my gender wasn't represented in the film, or my race wasn't represented in the film, or my sexual orientation wasn't represented in the film, doesn't mean I didn't get anything out of it. And I think that's another thing too we have to keep in mind. Diversity and everything in it, I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it's great. I think it's a real opportunity to give actors and actresses, or even directors, writers, the chance that they normally wouldn't get. I think that's wonderful. And the whole what's the thing that Frances McDormand mentioned at the Oscars, inclusion writer, that I am fine with, but just don't try to rewrite history in that way. Don't try to make it look like every film that came out before this, because it wasn't 100% diversified, because it was missing this or missing that we should wipe it off the map. That idea to me is absolutely ludicrous. Should be taken care of with little remorse, with extreme prejudice. Take care of that. Don't let it spread. Whatever you want to say there. But anyway, so that's my whole point here. And don't believe any online quippy little articles that try to get a gotcha little headline there. Don't believe them. Or if you do, if you're curious about it, then seek out the original source. Go back and say, okay, is that really true, or is this somebody taking an idea and running with it when it's not even close? So yeah, that's my whole gist with that thing. All right, well, we kind of took a while on that, didn't we? All right, well, yeah, you see, sometimes I get a little worked up about this, but that's okay. I mean, after all, I think our internet culture today, we're really prevalent on ranting and raving and people getting worked up. So if that entertains you, okay. If that floats your boat, that's fine. I mean, I think there are times today and situations today where it's appropriate to get worked up about certain situations and certain moments, but other times, we can take it easier. I mean, we could, but anyways, doesn't matter to me. All right, well, that's going to be it for this edition of the Plagmanrules Podcast. We'll be back again next time, whenever that is. Again, whenever something comes up that catches my interest, we'll talk about it, and we'll catch you guys next time.